Hi, I'm Jay Brook, and I love doing game jams. In fact, I've done almost 20 of them so far. So when my usual composer Maximus reached out to me about teaming up for this year's GMTK game jam, I obviously said yes. I've participated in the GMTK game jam exactly 3 times before, but never got far. The first time was when I was still really new to game development, and by new I mean it was literally my first game jam ever. And the game I made for it was the second game I ever made in my entire life. But despite the fact that I almost never win these jams, I also almost never pass up an opportunity to join one either. And this time we made something really good, so I thought I'd just drop a short video on it, regardless of whether the game will do well or not. On day 1, the theme for the jam came out, Loop. It's an interesting theme in that it's really unlike previous GMTK jam themes. Usually the themes are a little bit more specific but still open to interpretation. Loop is probably one of the most unspecific themes in the GMTK jam's entire history. Someone even said you can just make any game and say you connect it to Loop because there's a gameplay loop. Regardless, it did get me thinking about an old game I'd made before. Also for another game jam. It was this game where you control a train that moves around a looping track. I had zero idea where I was going with the idea at the time, and it was a huge mess of weird controls and completely unintelligible gameplay. But the thing that caught my eye was the looping train track in the game. It felt like a pretty natural connection to loop as a theme, and so I pitched to my team about the idea of a tower defense game where you go around a looping train track and defend a core from enemies trying to attack that same core. And because of the nature of your constantly moving train, you'd have to strategically plan out when and where to add new turrets, speed boosts, enemy traps, and stuff like that. It seemed a little bit ambitious for a 4-day game jam, but I already had a lot of experience setting up a top-down camera system and a card system from a previous dead project, so I figured it couldn't be too bad. Plus, I already had the whole train track system done in the original train game, so I could just use that for inspiration. But most importantly, the team seemed to quite like the idea of the game, and we decided honestly pretty quickly to just go along with it. For the rest of day 1, I resolved to just set up the foundational systems of the game. The first thing I did was add the camera so you could zoom and drag the screen around. Then I added the train tracks and a pathing system so the train could follow the tracks. Our artist Navi also set up the character sprite really fast, and overall everything was starting to come together. I really wanted to do more with the tracks thing, like letting the player edit the tracks during the gameplay for better strategy, but quickly realized how difficult it was going to be to code, especially in the time frame that we had to work with. In the meantime, Navi had already drawn new sprites for the player, the turrets, and the tracks, so I promptly added all of those things in, plus the core to defend and a basic enemy. With that, I went to sleep and ended day 1. While I slept, Navi, our main artist, and Scummy, our secondary artist, had both been hard at work and came up with a ton more art. Navi drew some absolutely jaw-dropping art for the cards, and Scummy helped prototype the enemy sprites. When I woke up, I immediately got to work patching in all their art and shaping everything into a playable game. The idea for the game at this point was to basically be a wave-based tower defense, so every wave you have to survive a certain amount of time where enemies try to attack your core. To kill enemies, you deploy cards like the rat turrets, which earns you money, and when the wave ends, you can use that money to buy more cards and upgrades. Both of which you'll desperately need later on, because the enemies get stronger and more numerous with each wave. And while I was cooking up the game's whole flow, our composer Maximus was working on the game's music. Of course, this being a game jam, I told Max to just make some silly tunes and with that, I ended day 2. Day 1 was all about the structure of the game, day 2 was about content, and so for day 3 I was focused on balance. We had a whole game now and it was definitely playable, but by god it was awful. My idea was that over time, you could build a bigger and stronger circuit to fight enemies with, but this also meant that cards that were deployed had to be permanent. And as we very quickly found out, this means that for 90% of the game, you're just kind of sitting there watching the game happen, which isn't very fun nor engaging. Something needed to change, and with only 2 days left and so many features still not in the game, that change would need to be drastic. So I made the decision to make cards impermanent. Instead of only needing to deploy your red turrets once, they now would expire after about 15 seconds, which meant that the player would be constantly engaged, watching for when the next red would expire and have to be topped up. Power-ups like the speed boost and enemy trap also benefited a lot from the impermanence change. The timing and location of placing a speed boost became much more important because if you just did whatever, you wouldn't get the most out of each card. Enemy traps also became much more strategic because instead of permanently slowing enemies in one area and making the game much easier, it now only slowed the stream of enemies for 10 seconds. So choosing when to deploy it became more like a calculated decision in a pinch rather than a simple whim. Plus, the fact that cards expire also means that the economy of your cards becomes much more important. Because you now have a finite number of turrets each wave, if you run out of turrets before the time is up, you're essentially cooked. And that even extends to the shop, because now you're always looking to stockpile on more turrets, but at the same time you have to determine when you need more non-turret power-ups as well. And it becomes this delicate balancing act of choosing between more turrets and more power-ups. It wasn't perfect, but the game did finally feel at least somewhat fun and engaging now, which was a great sign, because I didn't have much time on day 3, and that was basically all I could get done. So that meant I only had 1 day left to finish adding all of these things. As soon as I woke up, I immediately got to work. Day 4 was all about polishing the game into something presentable, which meant a lot of it was just implementing all the banger art from Navi and Scummy. Navi came up with some absolutely beautiful designs for the gameplay UI, which made it look less like a prototype and more like an actual game. I also made cards properly show their cost, number of users left, name and description, which took way longer than I thought. Scummy helped finish off the sprites for the enemies and their spawners, and then it was all about sound effects. Maximus, our genius composer, once again comes in clutch to basically handmake all of our sound effects, which made my job of patching them in much easier. And with 6 hours left before the jam ended, this was what we had. At this point, all of us were burnt out, but I still really did not like how the background of the game was so empty.
Brother, what's that?
So Scummy really quickly made this tile which added a lot more life and fullness to the game, and also this beautiful cover art for the itch page. With that, I hit submit and dropped like a sack of potatoes. By the time this video is out, the jam will probably already be over. I'm in no delusions of winning, considering there's like a bajillion entries this year, but overall I think this might be the best jam game I've ever made in my entire life. The sheer amount of code, design, art, music and sound effects we managed to make in 4 days is absolutely astounding. Not to mention just how insanely good this game looks thanks to Navi's beautiful card art and Scummy's cover art. And the music? Actually so insanely good, it had me shook the first time I heard the tracks. I'm really proud of what my team and I managed to make this time around. And if you want to go check it out, the link to the game is in the description. And sorry if the video's a bit shorter this time around, I'm also working on the next Better Up devlog. There's some really cool new things I want to talk about in that video, so if you want to see it, please subscribe and drop a like. Thanks for watching.